The whispers of history often forget the name Timur, but the scar he carved across the 14th century is a horror the world will never fully forget. He was a figure of terrifying dualities, a man whose legacy is painted in the starkest contrasts imaginable. Imagine a ruler who could spend an afternoon discussing philosophy with a poet, and the very next morning oversee the construction of a monument made from 20,000 human skulls. That was the reality of Timur's empire, a realm defined by its breathtaking art and its unimaginable cruelty. In the West, we know him as Tamerlane, a name that echoes with a strange, almost mythical quality. He was the last great cataclysm of the nomadic steppe, a seismic force that reshaped the political and cultural landscape from the borders of China to the gates of Eastern Europe. Yet, his ambition was a river drenched in the blood of millions, a campaign of conquest so vast it may have erased a staggering 5% of the entire world's population from existence. To put that in a modern context, it would be equivalent to the sudden disappearance of over 350 million people today. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was a demographic event, a storm of violence that swept from the deserts of Central Asia to the lush plains of India, and his long shadow of terror stretched for centuries. So, who was this complex architect of carnage? How did a man with such profound and painful physical disabilities rise to dominate half the known world? The journey of Timur is not a simple story of a tyrant. It is a dark epic about the sheer, terrifying power of human will, the seductive allure of absolute power, and the chilling efficiency of organized brutality. Our story begins not on a throne, but in the obscurity of the 14th century Chagatai Khanate in what is now Uzbekistan. Born in 1336, Timur entered a world of chaos and fractured Mongol rule. His early years were not those of a privileged prince, but of a struggler, a survivor in a brutally competitive environment. He was not born to a great title. He had to seize it, forge it from the fire of conflict. And from the very start, his body bore the marks of his violent trade. The name, Tamerlane, itself, the one history remembers him by, is a European corruption of Tamerlane, which translates bluntly to Timur the Lame. This was not a poetic epithet, but a factual descriptor. Centuries later, when Soviet anthropologists opened his tomb in Samarkand in 1941, they found a skeleton that confirmed every ancient story. His right leg was withered, with fused knee and hip joints, meaning he would have dragged it painfully with every step. His right hand was missing the two smallest fingers. His shoulders were uneven, one significantly higher than the other. Here was the body of a man who lived with constant pain and visible deformity. The origins of these injuries are shrouded in legend and propaganda. One hostile chronicler, Arab Shah, claimed they were sustained in a cowardly act, shot by arrows while Timur was stealing sheep as a young bandit. This story, likely crafted to diminish him, paints a picture of ignoble beginnings. The more probable, and perhaps more telling, explanation is that these were battle wounds, trophies from his ruthless early career as a mercenary and soldier for hire in the service of local khans. They were the price of his ambition, paid in his own flesh and bone. So we must ask, how did this man, who struggled to walk without a pronounced limp, become history's most relentlessly mobile warlord? His physical state did nothing to hinder his ruthless ambition. If anything, it may have stoked an inferno of insecurity and drive within him. A life defined by overcoming limitation, by proving his strength against constant mockery or pity, forged a conqueror of unimaginable resolve from a crippled youth. Timur's rise was a masterclass in opportunistic genius. His military career began not with grand armies, but with a small band of followers, navigating the treacherous politics of the decaying Mongol Khanates. He was a plotter, a betrayer, and a survivor. Early on, he aligned himself with a fellow warlord, Amir Hussein, and together they carved out control of the region of Transoxiana. But for Timur, partnership was always a temporary strategy. In 1370, in a move that would define his modus operandi, he turned on his ally, eliminated him, and declared himself the supreme leader, the sole ruler of the Western Chagatai Khanate. This was the pivotal moment. From this point forward, for the next 35 years, Timur would exist in a state of perpetual, expansionist warfare. The so-called Timurid Empire was born not in peace, but in betrayal, and it would be sustained by endless conflict. His empire exploded outward with a terrifying, systematic precision. He first consolidated his power, crushing rival Mongol chieftains and uniting the tribes under his brutal discipline. Then he turned his gaze south and west. Persia, then a patchwork of kingdoms, was his first major target. The great city of Herat fell in 1383, a prelude to a comprehensive campaign. City after city either surrendered or was stormed. By 1387, with the capture of Isfahan, all of Persia was under his heel. But Timur's ambition was insatiable. He then turned north to confront the rising power of the Golden Horde and its Khan Toktamish, a former protege who had now become a rival. In two decisive battles, at the Kandurcha River in 1391 and the Terek River in 1395, Timur annihilated Toktamish's forces, shattered the capital of Sarai, and broke the Horde's power for a generation. With his northern flank secure, Timur looked east to the legendary wealth of India. The subcontinent at the time was politically fractured, a constellation of warring sultanates, and Timur exploited this weakness with surgical ruthlessness. In 1398, he launched a lightning invasion, blitzing through the Khyber Pass and into the Punjab. His advance was less a military campaign and more a moving cataclysm. Cities that resisted were made into examples. But the true apex of horror was reserved for Delhi itself. Before the decisive battle at the city's gates, Timur faced a logistical and strategic nightmare. He was holding over 100,000 Hindu prisoners of war. Fearing they would revolt and join the enemy during the fighting, he issued one of the most chilling orders in military history: execute every single one. Chronicles speak of the land being bled white, of the air thick with the sounds of slaughter, and of new, grotesque towers of skulls rising on the plains. Delhi was not just captured, it was eviscerated, its population massacred or enslaved, its wealth plundered, its spirit broken so completely it would take a century to recover. Yet, Timur was not done. He wheeled his army west again, toward the heart of the Islamic world and the rising Ottoman Empire. He warred with the Egyptian Mamluks in Syria, capturing and sacking the legendary cities of Aleppo and Damascus. In Damascus, despite its surrender, he unleashed a massacre so brutal it led some Islamic scholars to declare him an enemy of the faith. People were said to be crushed in wine presses, burned alive, or taken as slaves, while the city's artisans and scholars were forcibly relocated to Samarkand. Then came his crowning geopolitical achievement, the humiliation of the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I. The clash between Timur and Bayezid was a collision of titans, fueled by pride and insulting correspondence. They met at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Bayezid, in his haste to intercept Timur, made a fatal error. He forced his army on a grueling march across an arid plateau in the height of summer, failing to secure adequate water supplies. Timur, the master strategist, used maneuver and deception. He circled behind the Ottomans, forcing them to march back, exhausted and parched, to defend their own camp. The battle was a foregone conclusion. The fresh, well-supplied Timurid forces decimated the weary Ottomans. Sultan Bayezid was captured, an unparalleled disgrace, making him the first and only Ottoman ruler ever taken prisoner in battle. The stories of his captivity, whether fully true or embellished, are the stuff of legend. That he was kept in an iron cage, displayed like a trophy, forced to watch as Timur feasted. The symbolic power of this act was immense. The mighty Ottoman war machine, the terror of Christendom, had been utterly broken by the steppe lord. This victory had a profound and unintended consequence for a distant continent, Europe. The Ottomans had been storming through the Balkans, their momentum seeming unstoppable after their victory at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. The fall of Constantinople appeared imminent. Timur's destruction of their army at Ankara and his capture of their sultan triggered a devastating 11-year civil war, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, as Bayezid's sons fought for the shattered throne. This crisis bought Europe precious, vital decades to regroup, to fortify, and to psychologically prepare for the later Ottoman resurgence. While Timur had no thought of saving Christendom, his goal was purely his own glory and vengeance. His personal vendetta accidentally altered the destiny of a continent, delaying the Ottoman advance long enough for powers like Hungary to strengthen their defenses. Throughout this relentless campaign of conquest, a consistent and horrifying pattern emerged: Timur's use of psychological terror as a weapon of policy. He was not merely content with defeating armies. He sought to break the will of entire populations before he even arrived. His signature method was the construction of pyramidal towers, or minarets, built not from brick or stone, but from the carefully stacked skulls of his defeated enemies. This was not random savagery. It was calculated theater. The skull pyramids served multiple, chilling purposes. They were a grisly accounting system, a monument to his power, and most importantly, a message. Envoys and travelers would see these structures and carry stories of Timur's dreadful wrath back to the next city on his path. The goal was to inspire such paralyzing fear that cities would surrender without a fight, saving his army time and resources. The massacre at Isfahan in 1387 is the most infamous example of this economy of terror. The city initially surrendered peacefully, but when the citizens later rebelled against his heavy taxes and killed his garrison, Timur returned with a fury meant to echo through the ages. He ordered a total massacre. Historical accounts describe his soldiers being given quotas, each man required to bring back a specific number of severed heads. The pyramids built from these victims were said to number 28, each containing over 1,000 skulls. An eyewitness chronicler, tasked with recording the count, wrote that he stopped in sheer revulsion before finishing. Estimates of the dead range from 70,000 to a mind-numbing 200,000. The lesson was clear. Surrender could be tolerated, but resistance would be met with annihilation. This policy was repeated at Baghdad in 1401, where after recapturing the city from rebels, Timur ordered such a widespread slaughter that soldiers, desperate to meet their head quotas, were said to have begun killing their own prisoners and, in some desperate accounts, even their enslaved wives. But to view Timur solely as a mindless butcher is to misunderstand the man and his enduring legacy. He was a figure of profound contradiction, a tyrant with a refined and discerning appreciation for art, architecture, and high culture. He saw himself not just as a destroyer, but as a builder, a patron on a world historic scale. As his empire grew, his tactics evolved. In his later campaigns, he began systematically sparing the lives of artists, architects, scholars, weavers, metalworkers, and calligraphers. These skilled captives were not killed. They were deported, taken on the long journey back to his beloved capital, Samarkand. And it is in Samarkand that we see the other side of Timur's coin. He transformed this city into the dazzling jewel of Central Asia, a testament to his power and his taste. Using the labor and genius of the craftsmen he had gathered from every corner of his empire, from Persia, India, Syria, and beyond, he built breathtaking monuments. The Registan Square, with its madrasas adorned in brilliant, glazed turquoise and cobalt tile work. The Bibi Khanum Mosque, one of the largest in the Islamic world at the time. The Gria Mir, his own magnificent mausoleum, with its majestic fluted dome. Samarkand became a living museum of conquered cultures, a center of commerce, astronomy, and learning. His grandson, Ulugh Beg, would build a legendary observatory there, advancing astronomical knowledge for the age. Yet, even in this realm of creation, Timur's cruelty was never far from the surface. The popular legend of the Bibi Khanum Mosque's construction captures this duality perfectly. The story goes that while Timur was away on campaign, his favorite wife, Bibi Khanum, commissioned a grand mosque as a surprise for his return. She hired a young architect who, captivated by her beauty, refused to finish the work unless she gave him a kiss. She reluctantly agreed. Upon Timur's triumphant return, he was enraged by the story. He executed the architect and decreed that thereafter, women must wear veils to hide their faces from strangers, thus explaining the later adoption of the veil in the region. While the historical accuracy is dubious, the parable persists because it perfectly encapsulates the Timurid world. Breathtaking beauty built under the shadow of absolute, capricious, and brutal power. Timur's relationship with religion further deepens the contradictions. He presented himself as a devout Muslim, a Ghazi or warrior for the faith. He used religious rhetoric to justify his campaigns, especially against the Christian kingdoms of Georgia and Armenia, and against the Muslim Ottomans whom he accused of insufficient piety. He claimed his sack of Damascus was revenge for the murder of the Prophet Muhammad's grandson centuries earlier. Yet, his actions frequently betrayed a purely political and brutal pragmatism. He slaughtered Muslim populations in Damascus and Baghdad with a ferocity that horrified the Islamic world. He used religion as a tool of conquest and control, not as a moral compass. In the siege of the Christian-held city of Smyrna, after promising safe passage, he resorted to tunneling under the walls to collapse them, then massacred the defenders. At the Turkish city of Shivas, he promised the Armenian garrison that no blood would be shed if they surrendered. They did. He then had all 4,000 of them buried alive, technically keeping his word about not spilling blood. His faith was flexible, a weapon to be wielded, not a constraint on his ambitions. So what ultimately was the legacy of this walking paradox? Militarily, he was perhaps the last of the great nomadic empire builders, a successor to Genghis Khan in both scale and method. Politically, the empire he built was entirely personal. It fractured into smaller states shortly after his death in 1405, as he was preparing an invasion of Ming China. He died not in battle, but of illness, far from his glittering Samarkand. Yet, his cultural impact was lasting. The Timurid Renaissance, fostered by his descendants, became a golden age of Persian art, science, and literature, influencing the later Mughal Empire in India and the Safavids in Persia. Timur forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about history and power. He demonstrates that civilization's greatest artistic flourishes can be funded by its most savage atrocities. He proves that strategic genius and cultural refinement can coexist with a capacity for genocide. He was a man who conquered not just lands, but the very psyche of nations, using fear as his most potent weapon. His story is a dark mirror, reflecting the terrifying heights a single human will can reach when utterly unconstrained by morality, empathy, or mercy. He was the storm that rose from the steppe, a force of nature who believed the world was his to reshape, whether through the delicate brush of a master artist or the sharp edge of the executioner's sword. And in the end, he reminds us that history is written not only by the wise and the just, but in indelible, bloody ink, by the relentless and the ruthless. If you were gripped by the epic, dark story of this forgotten titan of terror, this architect of empires and atrocities, make sure you hit the like button. It truly helps our channel, Winds of Thought, grow and bring more deep, research narratives to light. And subscribe now, because we have so many more stories like this to tell, dives into the lives of other powerful, complex, and often dark figures who shaped our world from the shadows of history. Who should we cover next? Let us know in the comments below.